I found the bug in a teddy bear. It was supposed to be a cute anniversary gift from Margaret, my wife of 50 years. A soft, brown bear with a stitched heart that said, "Forever yours." She gave it to me on the morning of our golden anniversary. I remember her smile, the way her hands trembled slightly as she handed it over. I thought it was love. It was a lie. I had noticed strange sounds in the house for weeks, soft clicks, like switches turning, microphones activating. At first, I blamed my age. 72 years old, maybe my ears were playing tricks. But the feeling didn't go away. One night, after Margaret fell asleep, I went into my office and unlocked the safe I hadn't touched in 20 years. Behind the old revolver, under stacks of forgotten tax papers, was my IF scanner. I used it decades ago during a case, back when I still worked for the Witness Protection Division of the U.S. Marshals. I turned it on. It clicked immediately. A signal, strong and steady, pulsed from the bedroom. I moved slowly, my heart pounding like I was 30 again and in the field. The signal pointed me straight to the teddy bear. I slid it open with a letter opener. Inside, behind the stuffing, was a listening device no bigger than a thumb. It was active. It had been recording our conversations, our movements, probably for months. I looked at the stitching again. Forever yours. I almost laughed. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed to be sure. I needed to understand who she was working with. Because one thing was clear, Margaret wasn't just cheating with some neighborhood loser. This was bigger, smarter, and planned. The next day, I pretended to forget our dinner reservation. She stormed out of the house like I was just another senile old man who'd forgotten his anniversary. That night, I followed her. She drove to St. Andrew's Church. That was our community's safe place. Weddings, funerals, Sunday prayers, it all happened there. She walked inside, alone. I waited in the parking lot, watching the stained glass windows glow. 20 minutes later, he arrived. Tom. He wasn't just our neighbor. He wasn't just the man who gave me cigars every Christmas or helped me with the sprinkler system. He was younger than me by 10 years, tall, square-jawed, soft-spoken. I'd trusted him. God help me, I once told him things I never told my sons. He entered the church and didn't come out for an hour. When he did, Margaret was with him. She laughed. She touched his arm. When they kissed in the shadow of the steeple, I didn't feel rage. I felt clarity. They walked to her car. She opened the trunk and handed him a folder. He opened it, flipped through the pages, nodded, and tucked it under his coat. She was giving him information. Not love notes. Not letters. Documents. I went home. I didn't cry. I didn't drink. I opened the hidden drawer under my desk and pulled out the package I had hoped never to need again, my black book. It held names, codes, old safe house locations, burner phone numbers. I spent the night on the floor, staring at the ceiling fan turn slow circles above me. 50 years. And she'd never loved me. She'd used me. The kids. The house. The whole life we built, just to cover. By dawn, I had a plan. I'd play dumb. I'd play the loving husband. I'd kiss her good morning. I'd mow the lawn. I'd go to church with her on Sunday and thank Tom for his help with the sprinklers. And in the meantime, I'd build my trap. I knew the exact frequency the bug operated on. I built a duplicate device, one that would feed false information back to the receiver. I wrote scripts, fabricated conversations. I'm moving the files to the garage. The tapes hidden behind the boiler. I even recorded phone calls to myself using a voice modulator. Fake informants. Fake confessions. I wanted them to act. I wanted them to move. Because I wasn't the target anymore. I was the hunter. The morning after I discovered the truth, I sat across from Margaret at the kitchen table, drinking the same black coffee I'd made every morning for the last half-century. She smiled at me like nothing had changed. The lines on her face softened with the sunlight slipping through the blinds, and I thought about how long she'd been lying with that same gentle smile. "Sleep well?" she asked. I nodded. Like a rock. She slid a plate of toast toward me. I thanked her, took a bite, and looked at her hand. Still wearing her wedding ring. The same hand that had passed confidential documents to a man who called me brother. I wanted to scream. I wanted to knock the coffee off the table, throw the toast at the wall, demand answers. But instead, I smiled back and chewed slowly. Margaret chatted about church programs and a bake sale like we didn't have a Cold War between us. I watched her lips move, nodding in rhythm, but I wasn't listening. I was thinking. She was dangerous. Calm. Experienced. I had to assume she'd been trained, not in combat, maybe, but in deception. This wasn't some affair with a coworker or a fling with a neighbor. This was a decades-long operation. Carefully planned. Carefully executed. Later that day, I called an old contact, Rick, a retired intelligence analyst who owed me a favor. I used a burner phone I built myself and told him only what he needed to know. "You think she's working with someone?" "I don't think." "I know." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "You ever consider this might be bigger than both of you?" "I already know it is." We met that evening at a diner off I-40, an hour out of town. Rick had aged, gray beard, slower steps, but his eyes were sharp as ever. He listened while I laid it out, the bear, the transmitter, the church meeting, the folder. He asked only one question, why now? That was the part that kept me up at night. Why after 50 years? Why wait this long to make a move? "She's waiting for something," I said. "Or someone." Rick slid a flash drive across the table. I pulled every known alias tied to your wife's maiden name. One popped. She applied for a passport last month under a secondary ID. Destination, Argentina. I stared at the flash drive like it was a time bomb. "She's planning to run," he said. "She's not going alone," I replied. When I got home, Margaret was folding laundry on the couch. She smiled at me as if she hadn't planned an escape with a fake name and a suitcase full of treason. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah. Just tired." She kissed my cheek as I passed. I felt nothing. That night, I opened my secret box again. Inside was the only photo I kept from the program, me, standing in front of a bank vault, holding a file. That vault contained names, routes, and stash locations used by the Witness Relocation Division. One of those names was mine. One of those routes brought me here. I stared at the photo until my eyes burned. That vault had been shut down in the 80s. Or so I thought. What if Margaret was trying to find it? What if Tom, or whoever he really was, had been planted to get it? They weren't just targeting me. They were targeting everything I'd ever done to protect others. Families. Whistleblowers. Agents. My entire past was at risk. The next morning, I planted my own bug under the passenger seat of Margaret's car. A new toy. State-of-the-art, undetectable, GPS-enabled. I could now track every word, every whisper. By the end of the week, I had hours of recordings. They were talking in code, her and Tom. "The package is almost ready. The pastor's schedule has shifted. We may need to accelerate the departure." Departure. They were leaving. Together. And soon. That night, I made my first move. I emailed Tom from a dummy address I created on a VPN. I know what you're doing. She told me everything. Meet me alone. No cops. No tricks. Or the files go public. The location, an abandoned rest stop 30 miles out, where the cell signal was dead and the cameras hadn't worked in years. I didn't expect him to reply. But he did. Tomorrow. Midnight. Come alone. Perfect. Margaret didn't notice anything. She thought I was still the same slow, kind old man who forgot his pills and nodded off during the news. She didn't see the soldier I used to be waking up inside me. That night, as she read on the couch, I stared out the window, listening to the clock tick and tick and tick. I was ready. Let them come. Because now, I wasn't just a husband betrayed. I was the trap. The road to the old rest stop was empty at midnight. Just the sound of wind moving through the pines and the slow crunch of gravel under my tires. I killed the headlights before I pulled in, letting the moon guide me to the center of the broken parking lot. The air was dry, tense, like the kind that settles before a storm. I checked my watch. 2 minutes to midnight. He was already there. Tom stood by a beat-up Buick, hands in his coat pockets, legs slightly apart. He was calm. Too calm for a man who thought someone had betrayed him. That told me two things: he didn't fully buy the message I'd sent, and he was armed. Maybe wired too. I got out of the car slowly, making sure my hands were visible. In my pocket was a small jamming device I'd built earlier that day, nothing fancy, just enough to block transmissions within a 15-foot radius. I clicked it on without him seeing. "Thought you'd come alone," he said. I did. He didn't smile. Didn't move. Just watched me like I was a deer that might bolt. "What did she tell you?" he asked. "She told me everything." I let that hang in the air, like bait. He didn't bite. His eyes didn't flicker, no twitch in the jaw, no subtle glance around. Instead, he said, "Then you understand why this has to happen." I tilted my head. "Why, what has to happen?" He took a step forward. "We've been patient with you, Jack. You lived a good life. Longer than most get. But this chapter is closing. She tried to protect you. I tried. But you got curious. That's a problem." There it was. Confirmation. I took another step closer. "So you were going to kill me?" No, he actually looked disappointed. "We were going to let you disappear. Quietly. A new name. Somewhere remote. One last gift. But now it's out of our hands." I laughed. A low, bitter sound that bounced off the cracked asphalt. "You think I'm afraid to die, Tom?" He frowned. "No. I think you're afraid of what they'll do to your family." The way he said it, so calm, so rehearsed, hit me like a bullet. My sons. My grandkids. They didn't know anything. They were civilians. Innocent. But that didn't matter to men like Tom. Or the people he worked for. I took a slow breath and nodded. "You want to talk about family?" I said. "Then let's talk about yours." He blinked. Just once. But it was enough. "Your wife, Eleanor. Sweet woman. Kindergarten teacher, right? Still at St. John's?" I stepped closer. "Your daughter just got that scholarship to Michigan. Full ride." What was it for, debate team? Now it was his turn to freeze. "You see, Tom," I continued, "I wasn't just sitting at home drinking tea and watching reruns. I was preparing. And now I've got leverage." He reached into his coat. I moved first. In a second, I had him on the ground. Not with force, those days were behind me, but with experience. I stepped into him as he moved, twisted his wrist, and took the gun before he could level it. He groaned as his back hit the gravel. "You sloppy," I said, pointing his own weapon at him. "You thought I was soft. Retired. Done." I knelt beside him. "Tell me everything. Right now. Who do you work for?" He spit at the ground. "You already know. I want a name." He stayed silent. I pressed the gun to his chest. "If you won't talk, maybe your daughter will. Maybe your wife." His face twisted in rage. "They have nothing to do with this." "Exactly," I said. "Just like my family." "But that didn't stop you from dragging them in, did it?" He closed his eyes. "Project Blue Hollow," he whispered. "That's what they call it. Started back in the 80s. Old files, buried agents, hidden assets. You were one of them. The last. She was sent in to monitor. She didn't want to do it at first. But then they offered her immunity. From what, I don't know." I stared at him. The puzzle was clicking into place. Margaret hadn't just betrayed me. She'd done it to save herself. Maybe from some crime I never knew about. Or maybe they made something up. Doesn't matter now. "Where is she?" I asked. "She doesn't know you found out. She thinks she's still in control." I stood. "Good." I left him there, on the ground, disarmed, humiliated. Driving back through the night, I kept the gun on the passenger seat. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't falter. I had the name. The operation. The motive. Now it was time to deal with the heart of the betrayal. My wife. She wanted out? She wanted immunity? She'd get it. But not before she learned what it means to cross a man who gave her 50 years. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my garage, lights off, gun on the table beside me, listening to the silence. My eyes stared through the darkness, but my mind was a flood of images: her laugh, our wedding day, the way she used to hold my hand when we watched old movies. I tried to remember when the love had died. But the truth was, maybe it never existed at all. The betrayal was no longer just personal. It was professional, strategic, engineered. I had spent my entire life protecting secrets, relocating people, hiding ghosts. And the one person I trusted most had been feeding those secrets back to the people I was protecting others from. I waited until 5 a.m. before I made my next move. I returned to my old storage unit on the edge of town. I hadn't touched it in over 20 years. Inside was a metal cabinet, locked with a code only I would remember, my badge number, reversed. Inside were files, hundreds of pages of dead drops, surveillance maps, photos of informants, testimony scripts. Some of it was outdated, but some was still active. Dangerous. And there, tucked in a manila envelope, was the real prize: 2 original tapes from 1983, detailing conversations between a state senator and a mob boss. These tapes had once put men behind bars for life. And they were supposed to be destroyed. Margaret never knew they existed. I never even told the agency. These tapes were leverage. Insurance. Now they were bait. By noon, I had the tapes digitized and broken into 4 parts. I uploaded each to a separate cloud server with auto-release timers, and sent anonymous links to 3 secure news outlets and 1 government watchdog group. If I died, or vanished, those links would go public. It wasn't just about revenge now. It was about control. I came home around 2 in the afternoon. Margaret was outside, watering the flowers like nothing had changed, like she wasn't a ghost in the body of the woman I'd once loved. I stood in the driveway and watched her for a moment. She waved. "Hey, hun. I was thinking chicken and rice tonight." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Sounds good." She came over and kissed my cheek. I felt the chill of her lips long after she walked past. Later, I listened to the bug in her car. She met Tom again, briefly, in the back of a bookstore. The conversation was short but revealing. "We move in 48 hours, she whispered. "What if he suspects?" Tom asked. "He's old. He's tired. He still loves me." I smiled at that. They had no idea who they were dealing with. That night, after she went to bed, I went into the garage again and made my final preparations. I gathered the old documents, the burner phones, the maps, and a small metal box with my father's military medals. This wasn't just about exposing them. It was about finishing it right. I wrote 3 letters. One to each of my sons. In them, I explained the truth, not all of it, but enough. Enough so they'd know I hadn't gone mad, hadn't betrayed anyone. I left them in a safe under the floorboards in my study. At 3 a.m., I went for a walk. The town was quiet. Empty. I passed the church where she met Tom, the diner where I saw Rick, the hardware store I hadn't stepped into since 2004. I realized something as I walked. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was free. For 50 years, I had lived with a shadow I didn't even know was there. Her shadow. Their control. Now it was lifted. Now I had the power. And I knew exactly how to use it. The next morning, she asked if I wanted to go with her to the farmer's market. I said yes. We drove together. I smiled. I carried the bags. I even bought her favorite jam. We played the role perfectly. Everyone saw us and said the same thing they always had: "You two are still the dream couple." If only they knew. Back home, she went to take a nap. I went to the garage, turned on the fan, and made the call. It rang twice. "This is Langley Dispatch. This is Echo 9. I have a situation that involves compromised assets and corrupted agency contacts. I need a face-to-face with senior ops. Discreetly. This is tied to Project Blue Hollow." The silence that followed told me they knew the name. I gave them a time and a place. They agreed. Then I called Tom. "You told me 48 hours. Let's make it 24. I've reconsidered. I want out." He didn't ask questions. He said, "Done." And hung up. She came down for dinner like nothing had happened. I set the table. Poured the wine. Laughed at her jokes. I told her I was thinking about writing a memoir. "You should," she said. "You've lived quite a life." I smiled. "You have no idea." The sun rose like any other morning, but nothing felt the same. I drank my coffee slowly, watching Margaret from across the kitchen. She moved gracefully, just as she always had, setting down her cup, adjusting the sleeves of her blouse, fixing her hair in the hallway mirror. All the little things that once made her familiar now struck me as rehearsed. Calculated. Cold. In less than 24 hours, everything would change. She had no idea. I told her I was going out for a haircut. She didn't question it. I hadn't had one in months, but she smiled and told me to trim the eyebrows too. Like a good wife. Like a woman who hadn't been planning my removal behind my back. I drove to the rendezvous location first, a shuttered museum on the edge of town. Used to be a veterans hall, back when people cared about that sort of thing. Now it was just dust and faded flags. At 10 a.m. sharp, the car arrived. 2 men stepped out, suits, no smiles, one older, one younger. The older man extended his hand. Echo 9? I nodded. I'm Director Holloway. This is Agent Costa. We moved inside. I led them to the back room, where I'd set up the hard drive, sealed in a case, connected to a laptop. I showed them the recordings. The teddy bear transmitter. The digitized 1983 tapes. The car bugs. And finally, my findings on Project Blue Hollow. They listened. Silently. Occasionally, Holloway would glance at Costa, or take notes. But they didn't interrupt until I finished. Holloway finally spoke. You're aware this operation is classified above presidential clearance. I figured. That's why I made 4 copies of everything and gave them to people who don't answer to you. Costa narrowed his eyes. You threatening us? No, I said. I'm insuring myself. I want protection, for me and my family. And I want the assets targeting me to be neutralized. Holloway nodded slowly. Consider it done. And her? I asked. Margaret is already flagged. Surveillance confirms she's preparing to flee. We'll intercept her in coordination with your schedule. I want to be there. That's not standard protocol. She destroyed 50 years of my life. You want my cooperation? I want 5 minutes face to face. Costa looked to Holloway. Holloway paused, then nodded once. 5 minutes. Then she's ours. When they left, I sat alone in that room, staring at the empty chair across from me. I imagined her sitting there. The look she might give me. The tears she might fake. The lies she might spin. I didn't care anymore. I wasn't here for closure. I was here for justice. I returned home by noon. Margaret was in the backyard, pulling weeds from the garden. She looked peaceful, almost poetic in the light. Haircut looks good, she said. I smiled. Thanks. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I burned the old notes, shredded duplicate tapes, cleaned the garage. It felt like purging a part of my soul, one I didn't need anymore. At 5 p.m., I received a text from a secure number. Tom has moved. Location confirmed. Proceed on schedule. I sent my reply. Phase 2 engaged. I cooked dinner that night. Margaret poured wine. We ate in silence. For once, she didn't ask questions. At 8 p.m., I told her I was going for a drive. She didn't protest. I drove to the same rest stop where I'd met Tom before. Except this time, he wasn't waiting. This time, I was early. The black SUV pulled in 10 minutes later. Tom stepped out, dressed in jeans and a leather jacket. He looked relaxed, unaware that 3 federal agents were already in position, watching him from the woods. I approached. You said 24 hours, he said. You ready? I nodded. I brought something. I handed him a flash drive, blank, of course. Just a decoy. He pocketed it. She doesn't know? She thinks we're going to Argentina tomorrow. He grinned. She's good. I almost feel bad. You shouldn't. He laughed. Cold. I like that. I looked him in the eye. You ever loved anyone, Tom? He shrugged. Doesn't matter. Not in this line of work. That's the difference between us. I stepped back. The agents swarmed him in seconds. No warning. No chance to react. They pushed him to the ground, zip-tied his wrists, shoved a hood over his head. He screamed my name once, pure betrayal. Then they dragged him into the SUV and were gone. I stood in the dark, breathing slow, steady. 1 down. 1 to go. Back home, Margaret was asleep on the couch. A blanket over her legs, the television quietly playing some baking show she'd always liked. I watched her from the doorway. Tomorrow, she'd wake up thinking everything was going as planned. But in 24 hours, she'd be gone too. And I'd finally be free. The next morning started like any other. Margaret made scrambled eggs, just the way I liked them, light salt, no pepper, 2 slices of toast on the side. She set the plate down in front of me, kissed the top of my head, and sat across the table like she hadn't betrayed me. Like she wasn't waiting for a call from Tom that would signal our departure, and my disappearance. I looked at her carefully, noting every detail, the way she folded her napkin, the slight tremor in her fingers, the forced calm in her smile. She was rehearsing this. Acting. Trying to appear natural. But I'd been trained to read lies long before she ever stepped into my world. I was thinking, she said softly, after the market, we could go by the lake. Just us. It's been years since we've done something like that. I nodded, swallowing toast. That sounds nice. She reached across the table, took my hand in hers. You've always been good to me, Jack. I met her eyes. Have I? She tilted her head. Of course. I held her gaze for a moment longer, then smiled. Then let's go to the lake. We drove in silence. The lake sat on the far side of the county, down an old logging road few people used anymore. The water was still. Trees cast long shadows across the edge. It was a place we used to come to when we were young, before kids, before bills, before secrets. She spread a blanket on the grass and sat down, patting the space beside her. I sat, but I didn't take off my coat. She leaned her head against my shoulder. You remember our first time here? I do. You told me you wanted to grow old with me. I meant it. She closed her eyes and sighed. I never thought life would go by so fast. It does that, I said. She turned to me. Do you regret any of it? I looked out at the water. I regret that it wasn't real. She blinked. What? I regret that I gave you everything I had. My loyalty. My trust. My heart. And you turned around and sold me to the highest bidder. Her face froze. I reached into my coat and pulled out the teddy bear transmitter. Her eyes widened. I found this 2 weeks ago, I said. In the bear you gave me on our anniversary. You remember that, don't you? Forever yours. Except you weren't mine. Not ever. Jack, I followed you. To the church. I saw you with him. I know about the passport. The alternate ID. The transfer files. I know everything. She stared at me, stunned. Then her shoulders dropped. And she laughed. Soft at first, then louder. You waited this long to say something, she said, eyes sparkling. You let me think I was still winning? I needed time. To dig. To understand. To prepare. You've always been clever, Jack, she said. I never gave you enough credit. I nodded slowly. No, you didn't. She stood, dusted off her hands, and looked down at me. So what now? You going to kill me? No. That would be too easy. She raised an eyebrow. I had Tom picked up last night. He's already in federal custody. They know everything, Project Blue Hollow, the handlers, the overseas accounts. Your name's in every file. You won't make it out of this, she said calmly. I'm not planning to disappear. I stood and faced her. You had a choice, Margaret. 100 chances to stop. To tell the truth. I would have forgiven almost anything, almost. But you dragged our children into it. You used our life as a cover. You turned marriage into a mission. She opened her mouth but didn't speak. I've left instructions, I continued. If anything happens to me, the press gets everything. Names, dates, operations, recordings. They'll bury your career, your contacts, your entire network. She stared at me like she was looking at a stranger. I never wanted to hurt you, she said. You did more than hurt me. You erased me. For the first time, she looked like she might cry. But I didn't care. I walked past her, toward the car. I'll give you 1 hour, I said without turning. After that, they'll come. And I won't be there to stop them. She didn't answer. She just sat back down on the blanket, staring at the water, alone. By the time I got home, the message had already been sent, a target confirmed. Engagement authorized. She was no longer my wife. She was now just another asset gone rogue. And I had done what I was trained to do. Shut it down. The house was quiet when I returned. I sat in my old recliner by the window, staring out at the street. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the front lawn. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and went silent. I thought I would feel something, relief, maybe, or sadness. But there was nothing. Just a deep, steady emptiness. Margaret was gone. I didn't know if she ran or waited to be taken. Maybe she sat by that lake until the agents came. Maybe she tried to disappear. But it didn't matter. The trap had already been sprung, and there was nowhere left to go. At 7:10 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a secure line. The voice was short, direct. She's in custody. Attempted flight. Multiple aliases. Interrogation scheduled. I thanked them, hung up, and turned off the phone. It would never ring again. I stood slowly and went into the kitchen. Poured myself a glass of bourbon, just one. No ice. No toast. For 50 years, I lived beside a stranger. Slept beside a weapon dressed in soft skin and perfume. Raised children with her. Buried parents. Paid taxes. Watched sunsets. And the entire time, she was watching me. Not once had I noticed. Not once had she slipped. That was the part that stung most of all. I had spent my life reading people, anticipating moves, detecting lies. But I never saw hers. That made her better than me, in a way. Smarter. Colder. More committed to her cause than I had ever been to mine. At midnight, I got in my truck and drove to the old safe house in the hills. The building was barely standing, half the windows shuttered, dust everywhere. But the walls were still thick, the basement dry, the power surprisingly still working. I booted up the old network station I'd hidden behind a wall panel and connected the hard drive. There was still more to expose. Tom and Margaret were pawns. High-level, trained, embedded, but pawns all the same. Someone higher had authorized the operation. Someone had funded Blue Hollow, assigned targets, scrubbed files. And I was going to find them. I spent the next 6 hours going through every file, cross-referencing names, timestamps, locations. Some of it was familiar, old handlers I knew by alias only. Some was new. But a pattern began to emerge. The same name appeared again and again in transfer orders, surveillance requests, and funding logs. Martin Caldwell. A former deputy director, long thought retired. But his name appeared on a security clearance renewal just 6 months ago. He wasn't out. He was still active. Still pulling strings. And that meant this wasn't over. At dawn, I transmitted a single encrypted message to Langley's internal watchdog group. Subject, E. Caldwell. Blue Hollow Architect. Live and active. Files attached. I didn't sign it. They would know where it came from. Then I turned off the network and burned every physical file in a rusted steel drum out back. The smoke climbed into the pink morning sky, taking the last of that life with it. By noon, I returned home and found an envelope tucked in the mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single photo, black and white, grainy. Margaret. In handcuffs. Being led into a van. Her face was blank. Not sad. Not angry. Just hollow. Beneath the photo, a note. Asset neutralized. Operations still under review. I tore it in half and left it in the trash. I wasn't interested in their reviews anymore. I wanted closure. Not from them. From myself. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my sons. We hadn't spoken in a while. Not because of any fights, but because I kept distance. Kept them safe. That had been part of my job for so long, I forgot what it felt like to be close. "Hey," I said when the oldest picked up. "I was thinking of having a cookout this weekend. Just the three of us. You in?" There was a pause. Then a laugh. "Sure, Dad." "Yeah. That'd be great. Bring the kids. I'll get the grill ready." For the first time in a long time, I felt something. Not happiness, exactly. But something close. Hope, maybe. That night, I sat on the back porch with the dog, an old mutt I'd adopted from the shelter years ago when I thought I needed company. He laid his head on my boot, snored softly, content. I looked at the stars and thought about how far everything had come. I wasn't done yet. Caldwell was still out there. The system was still infected. But now, I wasn't hunting for survival. I was hunting for justice. I didn't plan to go back to Washington, but some roads take you whether you want to walk them or not. 3 days after I sent the Caldwell files to the internal watchdog team, I received a message. No return address. Just a location, a time, and a single word, a talk. I knew the place well, a bench behind the Korean War Memorial, shaded by trees and almost always empty at dawn. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd stood there decades ago with my hand on the shoulder of a widow who had just lost the last of her family to silence and secrets. Now I was the one keeping secrets. I arrived early, sat in the same spot, and waited. At exactly 6 a.m., a woman in a grey coat sat beside me. She didn't look at me. "You Echo 9, she said. "Used to be. No one really stops being Echo." I didn't answer. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small manila envelope. Inside were surveillance images, financial records, private flight logs, all tied to Caldwell. Offshore accounts, shell companies, covert movements under diplomatic cover. "Langley buried it," she said. "The tapes, the operation, the entire division. They are protecting him." Why? Because he's part of something bigger. Black sites, experimental programs, tech projects tied to foreign contractors. It's not just about witness protection anymore. I studied the images. Caldwell wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. Operating from behind layers of security, influence, and fear. He hadn't just orchestrated Blue Hollow. He'd used it to build an empire. "You want him brought down?" she asked. I looked at her. "Finally." "No," I said. "I want him ruined." She nodded once, stood, and walked away. I didn't ask her name. I didn't need it. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked in silence. I activated old contacts, disgraced hackers, ex-reporters, one former senator who owed me more than a favor. I didn't need loyalty. I needed results. I fed them files, dates, obscure names and connections that only someone like me would still remember. The story began to take shape. A public narrative. A slow leak. Caldwell's fingerprints appeared on everything from political blackmail to funding torture programs overseas. The press took the bait. Quietly, at first. Then with fury. 2 outlets broke the story within hours of each other. By the 3rd day, it was everywhere. Congress was forced to issue a response. Langley denied involvement. Caldwell took leave from all advisory positions. But I knew what was coming. He'd vanish. Slip into another alias. Another life. Unless I stopped him. I waited until they panicked. When the heat reached its peak, I made my final move. I sent him a letter. Hand-delivered to his home through a network of couriers. Inside, just one sentence. I'm not done. No name. No return address. Just that. The same night, I broke into a private intelligence server, through a line that hadn't been touched in 15 years. I uploaded everything. Every piece of Blue Hollow. Names. Deaths. Money trails. False suicides. Political payoffs. And then I triggered the timer. At midnight, 47 media outlets received everything simultaneously. By morning, the story had gone nuclear. Caldwell's face was on every screen. Agents scrambled. Statements were issued and retracted. Families came forward, relatives of the dead, the silenced, the erased. The machine had been shuttered. And I did it with a laptop and the truth. By noon, I received one final message. It came on a channel I hadn't used since 1987. Retirement confirmed. All debts closed. Stand down. I stared at the screen. They were offering me an out. A way to disappear clean. No trials. No questions. But I wasn't ready to stand down. I drove to a motel outside Richmond. Paid cash. Disconnected everything. Sat on the bed and stared at the wall. Then I picked up the pen and started writing. Not reports. Not intel. Letters. One for each of my grandchildren. Stories. Lessons. Things I had never said out loud. About trust. About lies. About how to know when someone's smile is hiding a weapon. They would never hear this from their schools. They needed to hear it from me. I wasn't a hero. But I was something else. A witness. And a witness never forgets. Rain fell steady that night, soft and cold against the windows of the motel. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the stack of handwritten letters on the nightstand. Each envelope carried a name I had whispered to myself 1,000 times: Emily, Brian, Lucas, Megan. Names I had protected from the shadows. Names I never thought I would attach to anything more than photographs and birthdays sent from afar. Now they had my words. The truth, or at least my version of it. The TV played quietly in the background. Caldwell was gone. Not arrested. Not shot. Just gone. A resignation, a brief press conference, and silence. The story was still spreading like wildfire, but without a face to interrogate, the public would move on eventually. The government always knew how to wait out outrage. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I didn't need closure from them. Only from myself. At sunrise, I checked out of the motel, paid in cash, and drove west. Through back roads and empty fields, into the hills where signal dropped and names disappeared. I wasn't running. I was reflecting. The drive took hours. I stopped only once, to buy a paper from a gas station. On the front page, a headline, "A whistleblower uncovers 40-year intelligence scandal." Below it, a grainy image of Margaret, handcuffed and hollow-eyed, taken the day of her arrest. She hadn't spoken a word since being taken into custody. Not to her lawyer. Not to the press. Not even to her handlers. Some thought she was in shock. Others thought she was playing a final hand. But I knew better. She was finished. Whatever they had offered her, whatever loyalty she had clung to, it was all burned to ash. The system had used her as long as it needed to. Then it dropped her like a spent shell casing. I pulled the truck onto a dirt path that led to a cabin I'd built years ago, deep in the pines. No one knew about it. Not even her. It had been my escape plan, my insurance policy if everything ever went south. Now it was my sanctuary. I stepped inside and was greeted by silence. Dust. The faint smell of cedar and old books. I lit the fireplace, warmed the room, and sat at the desk by the window. For hours, I said nothing. Just listened to the wind, the crackle of fire, the soft hum of peace I hadn't felt in years. Then I took out the final envelope. It was for her. No name on the front. Just a blank white envelope, thick with weight. Inside, I wrote not a confession, not an apology, but a record. What she did. What I knew. What she sacrificed. Not for honor. Not for country. But for control. You chose them, I wrote. Over me. Over truth. Over your own family. I don't hate you. I don't pity you. I simply release you. Then I sealed it and dropped it into the fire. The paper curled and blackened, the words turning to smoke and memory. That night, I dreamed of our wedding day. Not the real one. A version where I looked into her eyes and saw nothing hiding behind them. No secrets. No scripts. Just love. Simple. True. And when I woke, I cried. Not for her. For myself. For the years lost. For the man I used to be before duty, before lies, before the cold silence of knowing too much. I stood on the porch at dawn, watching the fog roll through the trees. The world felt quiet. Honest. And I realized something. I wasn't broken. I was clean. Finally. I still had breath in my lungs. And somewhere out there, my children were waking up. Drinking coffee. Packing lunches. Kissing their kids. They didn't know what I had done. But they would know who I was. Because I had written it all down. One final task remained. To go home. Not to the place Margaret and I built together. That house was no longer mine. It belonged to the story we told each other, a story that was never real. I would build something new. A smaller place. A quiet one. But this time, no secrets. No lies. Just life. On my terms. It started with a chair. Old, handmade, wooden. I found it in a junk pile behind a barn an hour west of the mountains. Broken leg, cracked backrest, years of weather etched into the grain. Most people would have walked past it. But I saw the potential. Something sturdy still hiding inside. Like me. I brought it back to the small cabin I'd claimed as home, set it on the porch, and began working. Sanding. Replacing parts. Polishing until the wood shone through again. Every stroke was a kind of ritual. A shedding of skin. Every chip that fell away was another piece of the man I used to be. I didn't keep a calendar. Didn't count the days. But time passed. The world outside kept spinning, news, scandals, politics, wars. The story of Blue Hollow faded from headlines. Caldwell vanished without a trace. No trial. No punishment. Just silence. But people remembered. They always do. Langley never contacted me again. No knocks on the door. No shadows in the trees. It was done. And I had survived. Each morning, I woke before the sun. Brewed coffee in an old tin kettle, fed the stray dog who never left my side, and walked the perimeter of the property out of habit more than need. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was peace through routine. I spent my days building, repairing, reading, writing. I wrote more letters, ones I didn't send. Reflections. Memories. Lessons. Not for anyone else, but for me. A kind of reverse interrogation. For once, I was the one asking the questions. What did I miss? When did it start? What part of me allowed it to go so far? I never found all the answers. But I made peace with the ones I had. One day, a truck pulled up the gravel road. Slow. Hesitant. I stood on the porch, hand near the sidearm I still carried, but didn't draw. The door opened. And my son stepped out. Mark. Oldest of the three. Taller now. Grayer. Same stubborn brow I used to scold when he was 10. He looked at me a long time before speaking. Got your letter, he said. I nodded. You meant it? Every word. He looked down. Then back up. I brought the kids. They are in the car. I stepped down from the porch. He didn't move as I walked past. I opened the truck door. Inside, 2 pairs of young eyes stared back at me. Unsure. Curious. One held a tablet. The other, a stuffed animal with a missing ear. Hi, I said. They blinked. Then the girl, Maya, if I remembered right, smiled. You Grandpa Jack? I smiled back. Yeah. I guess I am. That afternoon, the house wasn't quiet. It was full of footsteps. Laughter. Crayons on the table. Questions. Stories. I grilled burgers on a rusted grate. Mark helped fix a leaking faucet. We didn't talk much about the past. Just enough to acknowledge it. I don't get all of it, he said as the sun dipped low. But I know you did what you thought was right. I nodded. I didn't always know what I was doing, I admitted. But I never stopped trying to protect what mattered. He looked at his kids. Then at me. You did. When they left that evening, the silence returned. But it was different now. Softer. The dog rested at my feet. The stars blinked into view. I sat in the chair I'd rebuilt, a glass of bourbon in hand, and breathed deep. No alarms. No signals. Just there. There would always be ghosts. Always questions left unanswered. But I had done what most men never do. I had faced the thing in the mirror. And I didn't flinch. My wife betrayed me. My country abandoned me. But I stood. Not because I was fearless. But because I refused to stay broken. Some say closure is a myth. I say it's a choice. And I chose mine. Tomorrow I would build a second chair. And wait to see who else came looking for truth.